Scarcity in and of itself shouldn't exist on this planet with the resources that we have, the ingenuity that we have. Scarcity should not exist. It's a mindset that we have adopted that is not true to our nature. We don't have this sense of family. The ego-based systems of our planet are going to be shaken. We're already seeing it. When that happens, people are going to start looking for answers. They will look for what's real. So I think we'll see some very interesting times ahead. But I think for those that are already on that spiritual journey, it'll be one of the most exciting times to be on this planet.
Sacred Sons podcast is proudly sponsored by Four Visions. We are blessed to do this unboxing. Thank you to Mariah.
To me, it's really the mission of Four Visions, how they give back to the indigenous.
You know what I love about Four Visions? Their packaging is next level. CBD pain salve.
We got that Four Visions Radiant Protector Kit for the fathers. Botanicals, looks like some Chandur lotion, some protection spray for courage and strength.
Wild harvested Himalayan Sheila G.
Ooh.
This little package has so many nutrients in it. We can always use a bit more self-care, invest in ourselves. And Four Visions has these earth-based products. These methods are proven by 5,000 years of indigenous practices. For men, come back into natural ways of health and wellness. I think it's super important. Palo Santo anointing oil. The sweet bath in the bitter bath, all organic ingredients.
Sweet basil, tulsi, rosemary, thyme, lavender. You know what I absolutely love about Four Visions is that they use 100% natural material for their clothing, so I feel safe and confident and happy wearing it.
A portion of the proceeds of the merch goes to Magic Fund's Music Roots Recovery Project for indigenous youth in Putumayo, Colombia. And they're literally bringing the indigenous traditions back to the youth through the music, through the songs, and through the traditions. It's a beautiful place to invest in.
Love the mission and how much they're giving back to these indigenous cultures in Colombia and South America. It really is the difference I think we need.
Peace and blessings. Adam Jackson here with another episode of the Sacred Sons podcast. Brothers and sisters, we are building a community, a global community of like-minded, like-hearted, heart-led individuals who are seeking to just be a little bit better today than they were yesterday. I want to talk about what it actually takes to build authentic community in a modern time. You know, there's a longing, I believe, that we have, or that some of us may have for the village that once was. But what does the ancient future village look like? Today, we're going to explore that with our guest, Jost. Josh, you are joining us from Tahiti today.
I am indeed. It's a pleasure to be with you, Adam, today.
Where you live with your beloved wife and your youngest son. I'm very curious to understand what has brought you in your life's journey to Tahiti.
It's been an interesting journey, and I still kind of shake my head and go, like, how have I ended up here? It's interesting. I lived in Hawaii when I was younger, and also in Guam, so I spent some time in the Pacific and just always loved being in the Pacific. But then I spent many, many years in the United Kingdom. And I had, for a long time, had dreams about coming back to this part of the world, but didn't know how it was going to happen. And then a woman that I talked to is a very insightful, intuitive woman. She's just very blessed. She told me about 2 years before we moved here that we would be coming this way. And at the time, this was in COVID, at the time, I was just like, I just couldn't see how it was going to work out. And then I was invited to work with a private island resort here. It's about 20 minutes from Tahiti, originally as a consultant. And I'd never been to Tahiti before. But I came out here, and I remember the first night being here, and I just felt at home, just like I hadn't felt in years.
Did it feel like that dream you remembered as a kid?
It did. It did. But it was, it wasn't just a dream, it's just truly feeling at home. And I called my wife. I said, I don't know how, but I just have a feeling we're going to be back here. It just felt like this is where we're meant to be. And then I did spend some time with the group here and the team, and things just gelled, and then they invited me to join the team, and we moved out here 2 years ago. And it's just been it has been a dream, but we just feel incredibly blessed where we are at, where the divine has put us. And not just for ourselves personally, but I think that Polynesia has a gift to offer the world, and it aligns very closely, I think, with the work that you're doing, and what other people are sensing about finding life and community that's more authentic, that's more aligned to who we are biologically, spiritually, that is more fulfilling and rewarding than what the modern world is offering us. And so it's refreshing. I mean, Tahiti it's still about 70% Polynesian, and there are many places in French Polynesia. I mean, this area is the size of continental Europe. I mean, it's 150 atolls and islands spread across an area the size of continental Europe, and only 300,000 people live in that space. And there are many villages here where life has just remained almost untouched from modernity. They may have smartphones, but they still live in simple homes by the beach, and subside off the land and the ocean, and just live in harmony with the world. And it's beautiful, and it's inspiring.
Yeah. What is it that you see within that harmony? Like, what is it about the lifestyle? I mean, one can imagine, living by the beach in Tahiti will slow down and, bring joy to almost anyone, you could say. But seeing that culture intact, like, how do we, when you experience that, when you come back to the States, is it almost like culture shock in a way?
Oh yeah, very much so. Yeah. It's anytime, not just the U.S., anytime you kind of leave here and you step back into, the modern world, quote unquote, it takes a bit of adjusting to get used to it. And, I think as I've sort of pondered it, in the West, we're raised with this sort of value of success, right? It's like, in the West, to be a good, individual, to be a good member of society, you do that by succeeding. You better the opportunities for your children, for for those around you, and so you're conditioned from childhood to succeed and to achieve. But in Tahitian culture, it's different. And when you live on an island that's a very delicate ecosystem, and it's very easy to overuse your resources and then end up in famine. And so their entire cultural system, their sort of core cultural values and success, it's harmony. They want to live in harmony with their land, with their community, with their ancestors, with their gods. And so where we would feel stressed out because, we're not making enough money, or we're not, achieving enough in life, or, checking off the boxes of what, that success picture looks like, they would feel stressed out if their lives are disharmonious, if they've somehow fallen out of harmony with the land and with the spirit, the cosmos. So for them, it's all that. It's all just harmony.
Yeah. I feel like our culture, and I'll just say American culture that I was raised in, has normalized disharmony. You know what I mean? Like, wake up, jolt yourself alive, hurry up and get to your thing, like sit in traffic, like the normalization of being in a dysregulated system.
Hustle porn, right? It's like, go, and yeah, absolutely. And it's just a constant state of tension and conflict that drives, Western civilization, right? Because if you're not in conflict, you're not growing. So if you're not in conflict, if you're not in constant tension, then there must be something wrong, because you're not growing, right? Because growth happens through tension. But that sort of growth drive comes from the ego. It's that ego survival mechanism that fuels the drive for growth. Whereas harmony is different. Harmony starts from the place of wholeness. You're already whole. You're already pure. It doesn't start from the place of shame. It starts from the place of purity. And so it's more about protecting that and ensuring that you don't, you don't fall out of step with who you are. And who you are is not just you as a nuclear individual. Who you are is you as part of a bigger whole, right? So it's about knowing your place and where you fit within the whole. So that creates just a completely different way of looking at the world and thinking about the world. It's beautiful. It's inspiring to see that and to see people that live like that. But also sad as well when you see the clash of that, right? Because you still see the Western influence here, and I think that creates a bit of friction between, young people are sort of trying to find their way to fit.
Yeah, because harmony is such a beautiful picture, and the idea that we're all whole. But once you mix in capitalism, and specifically debt and interest on that debt into a system, I feel like it's very hard to again regulate from that perspective. So even I just want to throw this in there. Even at Sacred Sons, we are very good at creating harmony in a rites of passage style experience for 4 days, where we're all equal and we're all just humans. Yet on Monday we go back into our lives, into our homes, into that traffic, right? And so, right. Is there a bridge? Is there a bridge between what we see as capitalism, or is there another way, like to promote harmony while we do have the problems and the opportunities of currency?
That's a really good challenge, because I think there is. I think it's going to sound a little bit trite, but I'll maybe unpack it a little bit. But I think it is really about moving in abundance. People speak about that a lot, but I think it is about moving from a place of being working out of ego versus, moving out of ego and working into a place of wholeness connected with your true identity. That is what allows you to be in the world and not of the world, so to speak. And to be able to work within that system without being, lost in it. And community helps, because that's one of the challenges with the modern world, is that you are so isolated. And, it's this idea that we have of the sort of nuclear family is a relatively recent invention. Tribal culture didn't have this concept of the nuclear family. Everyone belonged to everyone else. You were a tribal family. You weren't a nuclear family. And what that meant for the lived experience of people in that tribal community was just dramatically different. Think about how isolating the nuclear family is, right? Let's get to sort of the sort of postmodern, right? If we just get to the sort of modern age, right, which was when, 50s, 60s, you had men going off into work in the factories, you had women being the homemakers, right? And men were slaving away to bring food home for the family. Women were home very isolated, trying to raise his families on their own. And we're all social creatures, but women especially need that sort of social fabric around them. And yet they find themselves isolated in a home on their own. And so, in the tribal communities, you didn't have that. You had, the men together would go out, and you weren't going off to work with people who were, basically trying to, where it was a competition, to fight for the top. You were going off to work with your brothers, right? You were all in arms together. Yeah. So you were working together as a collective, and this was your family, right? That you were working with. And the women weren't sitting at home isolated, doing nothing, waiting for the husbands to come back. They were running the civil side of the community together, while their husbands were away hunting or whatever. And so they weren't isolated. They were sharing to the sisterhood together of running the civil side of their community. It wasn't just raising children, but it was just the whole, everything that went together with running that community. And it was much more natural to how we, how we live.
To how we thrive, right? Because I think when you mentioned the word, like, let's throw the word scarcity out there. There's a lot of folks in scarcity right now. The wave of inflation post-COVID has hit the shores, and it's tough. It's really tough for a lot of people. And when that happens, when the scarcity mindset gets involved, I think that's what further isolates us.
Absolutely. And it turns us against each other, right?
Yeah.
Because we're fighting against each other for limited resources. That's the scarcity mindset. That's the survival mindset, which is the ego mindset, right?
And that's the big lie. It's the big lie.
Absolutely.
That exists.
Yeah, absolutely. Even scarcity in and of itself shouldn't exist on this planet with the resources that we have and the people that we have here, the ingenuity that we have. Scarcity should not exist. It's a mindset that, we have adopted that is not true to our nature. And I heard something this week that was really interesting. I thought about you when I heard it. There's a guy on TikTok called Dr. Roy Casagranda. He's a professor at UT Austin in political science. This guy's a bit of a polymath. He sort of knows a bit about everything. And he was talking about the whole alpha male concept and where that came from. And he said that the sociologist or researcher that came up with this concept did it by studying wolves in captivity. And with wolves in captivity, what happened was you take wolves that are from different packs, not even different packs, they're like different families from completely different regions, and you put them together, right, in a confined environment so they can't leave. And in this environment, these wolves kind of turn on each other and they fight with each other aggressively to see who's going to be the alpha. And so out of that, they developed the concept of the alpha male, the beta, gamma, and as a female as well, alpha, female, beta, and so forth. But what he was saying was that in the wild, when they studied packs in the wild, it was different. Because the alpha male and the alpha female were mom and dad.
Yeah.
Right? The betas were the kids. And the alpha and the male and female lived for the betterment of the kids. It wasn't a competition to see who was going to be the top of the pack and boss the rest of them around. They were living for the kids and the expectation that someday the kids would go off and start their own packs. And they were preparing them for that. So there was love in that. Completely different concept than what we've popularized around the sort of alpha male concept in modern society. I think that's a caricature of what real masculinity looks like. It isn't what masculinity is. But if you think of that in terms of, you sort of extrapolate that to Western culture in the modern world, it's like we're all wolves in captivity, right?
Yes.
And in this fight to be the alpha, right? And, whatever domain that we're thrust into with all these other hostile wolves who we don't, we all speak a different language, we don't understand each other. We don't have this sense of family, and that's what this idea of community. People speak about community. I think a lot of people have in their mind 1950s community. 1950s community wasn't real community. We're talking tribal community was family. People that you're with in community, you share the same blood. You were all part of one body, and what affected one affected everyone. And so it was a much more sort of communal way of looking at life together, which then enabled people to come out of that survival type of mindset, right? Because when you have that support and love around you, you don't have to worry about yourself survival in the same way, because even if you're going through hard times, you have, a group of people around you that are there to support you in all of that.
I think on the other side, it also promotes like a mindset of not over consuming as well, because it's like when you have everything that you need, the idea that you need more for later subsides. Does that make sense?
That in itself is scarcity. Even if you're sitting on $1 billion and you feel like you need more, you're still in a scarcity mindset, because it's just a fear about what if.
So with that, how do we we could start individually, but I'm really on this I'm really considering Sacred Sons community here.
Right.
Like in many
Yes.
ways, but I'm also thinking about my family, and I'm participating in the Western lifestyle of the nuclear family. How do we shift from captivity and competition into family and freedom?
It's a good question, isn't it?
Yeah. And not that you have to have the answer. Just to explore, like what I'm taking away in this moment is actually the importance of the relationships.
Yeah. So a bit of my background here that might be relevant. I grew up in it's called a Mennonite community. Mennonites, for those of you who don't know, they're very similar to the Amish. They're kind of branches off the same tree. And so they live in a very sort of traditional way. And so I had generations of my family who were basically pacifist Christians who moved around the world because they didn't want to fight in wars and they wanted to practice in community together. And so they started in southern Holland, northern Germany, that area, and then they migrated to Poland and then Ukraine, and some went to Siberia, but a lot of them ended up going to North and South America, which is how my family ended up in North America. And I remember growing up, even though it was in the U.S., growing up with a very strong sense of community around.
What state were you in?
So there were two communities that I was a part of from my mom's side and my dad's side. So I was born in a little town called Hillsborough, Kansas. It's a small little farm community and almost completely Mennonite. And then my mom was from a Mennonite community in Central California called a town called Reedley. And so my parents met at a Mennonite college, and so we spent time in both places. But then we traveled around quite a bit as well because my dad became an airline pilot. I was a bit of a black sheep.
Have you raised? How many barns have you raised? How many?
I've done no barn raisings in my life.
No barn raisings?
No barn raisings. No. Sure, I have cousins that have done plenty, but yeah.
When I look at the Amish culture, I'm like, they are doing something right because they can throw up those barns and it's so organized. There's so much order in that type of a community and with those type of relationships. But I also understand and I wonder, is there a cost for that much order?
Yeah, there is. There is. I mean, the community can be both wonderful and also stifling. It doesn't have to be, but it can be. It depends on whether the community's, life-giving or not, and how they interact. And so I learned very tangibly from a young age, though, what it felt like to live in community. I could walk through the main street of our town and go into every shop. Everybody knew who I was, who my parents were, my grandparents were. If I was getting in trouble, I'd get sent home, and that sort of thing. Everybody was looking out for one another. So that was really cool, and it gave me a really tangible sense of what that feels like, more so than maybe a lot of people have had the benefit of. But then later, I became interested in this topic of community, and I kind of took it into the business world because I started looking at how to help businesses develop more holistic cultures, authentic cultures, and holistic identities. And remember, there was a talk from Simon Sinek going around about start with why. It was probably the most watched TED talk of all time, and he starts with this idea of great companies start with why, mediocre companies start with what, And that really impacted me when I started looking at, okay, that's great, but how do I help companies build on why? I actually had a company myself at the time, and I was interested in this topic for myself, and I couldn't find anything that actually said, okay, here's how you build a company on why. And so I thought, well, maybe I can come up with a model somewhere, find an analog for a model that I could adopt. And I realized that, I had been very immersed in religion and belief systems for a long time. Matter of fact, I took biblical studies in college, and was very immersed in that whole world for a long time. And I thought, it's interesting. This is what religions have been doing for thousands of years, and they outlast empires. Maybe by reverse engineering what they do and understanding the model behind it, I can figure out the sort of code, if you will, to belief systems. And so I developed that. I started putting some material out on it. This is kind of how my whole career trajectory took off. And that kind of went viral, and I was invited to speak at a keynote speaker at events talking to CXOs of Fortune 500s and about how to do authentic branding and build authentic cultures and so forth, which is quite surreal. I mean, literally out of nowhere. And I realized that there were three fundamental components to belief system. Now, actually, let me back up. Let me talk about belief system versus community. They're not mutually exclusive, but they're important to understand how the two relate. So in sociology, there's a principle called Dunbar's number, which says that we as humans struggle to grow beyond groups of about 140. Which is why tribes never got larger than 140, right? Because if there's two of us, for me and you to be in a relationship, right? I have to understand you, you have to understand me. When you add a third person to the relationship, I have to understand how we relate. You have to understand how the other person relates, but I also have to understand the relationship between the two of you and between me and that person. So it doesn't just, it's not addition, it's multiplication. It's like every person you add, the relationship dynamics multiply, right? There's an exponential growth factor. And so what they found was around about 140 relationships is what the average person can kind of track in their head of like, okay, with a group of less than 140, we all have a feeling like we know one another, right? I know what you're doing, you know what this person's doing. I know all the dynamics going on in the culture. Once you get above that, you lose the ability to really keep track. And so the community starts to fragment. And then that's typically when another tribe would split off and go start a new tribe, right? So they could stay within that kind of 140 limit.
And I think there's sometimes when that happens, the tribes war. But is there a way to do it with harm? Is there a way to harmoniously encourage the natural multiplication?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm saying this just from what I've researched and what I've seen. So I'm not saying this from the standpoint of I have all the answers. I've been there, but
of course,
just looking at the
I know, but I'm just saying it's very timely what you're bringing forth.
So, so if we look back at human civilization, what happened was what enabled us to go beyond 140 is that we developed storytelling. Yuval Harari talks about this. Storytelling is the basis of human civilization. It was the starting point for us. And stories allowed us to package up our identity and our meaning and share it with other people. And so we can now start to grow beyond 140 people because, okay, I may not know you, you may not know me personally, but if we share the same story, we have a sense of brotherhood because we have that common story amongst us. That's what unites us. So that was a starting point for me in understanding the whole belief system thing. I later on came to understand that there were sort of three pillars to a belief system. And the first is that story. The story answers the question of why. It really helps us to understand why do we matter, and therefore what matters to us, right? It's our way of answering the question, why does it matter that we thrive, that we succeed? In this hostile world environment, it connects us all on a heart emotional level. Right? So it's the heart level of the belief system, our story. And out of that story come our values, and our values are what matters most to us, right? So our story says this is why we matter. Because we matter, these are the things that matter most to us. And so those values, they're kind of the bridge to the ideas. So a belief system in the second stage develops an ideology, a set of ideas that it sort of holds to. And those ideas engage us all on an intellectual level. So we all learn to think together. Not exactly the same, but together. We have certain ideas or principles about how we feel life should work, how we feel life should be, how we feel it is to live a good life. And so you take the story, you develop your ideals, your core beliefs, right? It could be principles of, brotherhood, of, and fraternity. It could be principles of, abundance versus, scarcity. It could be anything, but they're the ideas that matter most to you as a group. So, okay, now we feel the same. We share the same emotion. Now we share the same ideas. But the third thing that they do, which is what has made religions and belief systems, not just religions, but belief systems in general, so powerful, is that they then take those ideas and that story and then they develop rituals that put it into action, right? So you've got mind, body, and soul or emotion as the three pillars of who we are and the three pillars of the community. You develop a corporate heart, a corporate mind, and a corporate life or way of being. And very often those rituals or actions are symbolic more than practical. Some of them can be practical, but mostly they're symbolic. And they're what sort of embed the values of the belief system into people's lives. They make them practical, real, and tangible, right? They become a part of you. It's not just an idea out here anymore. It's something I live. So I'll give you an example of that, right? We do rituals every day as part of our Western culture that we don't even think about. So one of them, for example, is every time we meet, we shake hands. Why do we shake hands? It's unhygienic, spreads disease, right? It's not really the most, meaningful of rituals.
Yeah, I think it originated as a display of no weapons, like showing that you have no weapons. That's one of the origins of the right handshake.
There's a couple of thoughts out there around it that I think that was maybe a sort of start, and then it matured would be a better way to describe it. I'm not an expert in this, but this is my understanding. So rituals. So we take for granted that in Western culture, you approach people with a hand of friendship. Your default is, I'm going to assume you're a friend and not a foe.
Right.
Whereas a lot of cultures in times past, especially in the West, you didn't approach people in that way. You assumed they were a foe until they proved to you otherwise. Okay. And you think about how much of Western culture has been built on this idea that we give people the benefit of the doubt. And it's a ritual that's ingrained within us every single time, to the point that if you meet somebody and refuse to shake their hand, it's a huge affront. And so rituals are a very, very powerful tool in terms of helping us to internalize our ideas and make them. They're habit forming.
What is a greeting ritual in Tahiti? I've been to Thailand. The Sawadi Ka, in the way that people greet each other with a bow and prayer hands, I found it to be so warm and accepting. Is there anything in the Tahitian culture greeting wise?
Yeah, so there's a phrase here called Ia Orana that they say, which I understand means, I'm not an expert in Tahitian, but I understand it means it's an expression of life giving. I'm giving life to you. Their greetings were very elaborate because usually when you were to greet someone, you would arrive on a boat. And so the tribe on the land would then, you'd have to say why you were there. And then they would have to ask the ancestors if it was okay for you to come onto the island. So it's very, very ritualistic. And if it was okay, then they had a special place called the Pai Pai that was erected where they would take you to introduce you to the ancestors. And then they would wish your time there would be fruitful and so forth. So it was very, very ritualized.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I love that idea how we have been conditioned in the West to greet everyone, with the mindset of acceptance. But I feel like that we've lost the meaningfulness of the ritual.
Yeah.
So, you know what I mean? I feel like it's an
Yeah.
unconscious habit.
Yeah, absolutely. Which happens when you lose the belief system, but the ritual still remains. It's like we're doing this, but we don't know why we're doing it.
Yes. That's a great way to explain that. Perfect.
So coming back to this question about how you maintain community, um, there's a belief systems for me they're a social operating system. And so, like a computer has an operating system that sort of brings all the hardware together and makes it work so that you can watch a movie or, surf the internet or whatever, right? So the belief system is a social operating system that allows people to come together and work and function as a community. And you can build good belief systems and you can build toxic belief systems. Right? It's in and of itself is a tool. The problem is when the belief system becomes elevated beyond its purpose. So if the purpose of the belief system is for us to learn to live together in love and harmony, when we start placing the belief system as primary and as supreme, then what happens is it becomes a tool of power and control. And so this is what you've seen with religions. Like, for example, I was very immersed in Christianity and theology, and one of the things that sort of led me out of that was I realized that what Jesus was doing wasn't starting a new religion. He was trying to help people transcend religion. And then later on, all those teachings were used basically to build a whole new religion that was the antithesis of what Jesus was trying to do on this planet.
Totally. I was raised Catholic, and that's the part I got to was like, but wait, are you not hearing what he said? He's like, yeah. Split a piece of wood, look under a rock. You don't need the temple. Right. It's all here. I'm like, what about what he actually said?
Exactly. Well, and one of the most eye-opening passages for me was when Jesus healed somebody on the Sabbath. And in Jewish culture, almost the one law that was probably more important than any other law, was the Sabbath. It was the symbol for them of their relationship with God, the fact that they rested one day a week as a symbol of trust in God, which is beautiful. I think it's a beautiful practice. But they lost sight of why they were doing it. And suddenly keeping the Sabbath became more important than actually loving and helping someone in need. So when Jesus heals this man on the Sabbath, and the religious people of his day came to him and said, what are you doing? You've just broken the law. You've healed somebody on the Sabbath. And his response was, man was not made for the Sabbath, but the Sabbath was made for man.
That's amazing.
So the belief system needs to stay fresh. It needs to stay relevant. We need to be able to keep challenging that. It's a useful tool. It's an important tool. Even your personal belief system, right? It helps you create clarity within yourself, so there's a harmony between your personal story about that narrative you tell yourself about who you are and the beliefs and ideas that you have, and then your ability to then ritualize that into your life where you're living authentically to your beliefs and your story. You're not saying this is who I am, but you're living in complete contrast to it. So you can live it on a personal level, and I think we all to some degree do, whether consciously or not. But you also need that in a community to create harmony. But that belief system needs to evolve, and very rightly, because your story is going to evolve. Your ideas are going to evolve. What may have been a really cutting edge, change the world idea when you start may start to lose relevance later, and you go, okay, the sentiment's nice, but we need to refresh this to be relevant with where we are today. And then your rituals and your practices need to evolve. Now, the really smart religions were good at adapting this as they moved from place to place, especially the rituals, because what may work as a way of life and as a ritual practice for one group in one area may not work at all for another group in a completely different area, right? So you see this with very strict religions. I'm not going to name any names, but let's say very strict religions that have maybe grown out of, let's say, a Middle Eastern context, where if you look at the customs and practices that were developed at the time, they made complete sense for Bedouin tribes living in a Middle East desert, in an area that was basically, like a bit like Game of Thrones at the time. But then you bring that into the modern age, and then you try and export that verbatim to other cultures, and these things just don't make any sense. And we look at it like, why are you doing that, right?
Yeah, and even like just what you said, even based on climate, if you try to take ideology from a desert religion into the jungle, it just doesn't make sense, because the creator in the desert is one of harshness and no water. However, in the jungle, it's one of abundance and like life-giving, like you noted. So I'd say the psyche and the consciousness that creates those constructs is going to be completely different.
Absolutely. It will do. And, there's that sort of history, that cultural history that already exists, where people already associate certain actions with certain ideas. And so you can develop a real conflict between ideas and cultures when you try and sort of bring this new cultural way of life. So it has to be adaptable. So coming now to where you are in Sacred Sons, and what the wonderful movement that you're growing, and I love the attitude and the approach that you're taking, because it's like, the alpha father wolf saying, okay, it's time for you guys to go build your own community, right? Because we still need that small, close community of people who know us and we know them. But you also want to be part of something bigger. You don't want to just be an isolated movement. And we want to create something bigger on the planet, right? We want to create a movement of movements across this planet that will transform the way in which we're living.
We want to create culture first.
Right.
Beyond being a movement, we want to change what it is to be a man in a modern time, changing and impacting the culture of what it means to be a man. How do we show up as men with the new story? And I love that you're bringing in the idea that we need a new story of what it means to be a man.
Yes.
Because that's a big part of the obstacle that we face. Is like, what is the story that we're telling ourselves about ourselves as men on this planet?
Yes. Yeah, and people are looking for that.
And even if for someone who might be like, no, men are fine. Well, let's zoom out. Men have created a modern world where birth is industrialized and our elders are pushed into homes and isolated. Is that the kind of a culture that we as men want to continue to perpetuate?
Yeah. Yeah.
That's a starting point. And we can zoom in and look at all the little intricacies and all the distractions and all the addictions. But broadly, what is the culture that we as men, because we're so powerful and we are creators, and and when we get our hearts out in front, there's a lot of powerful things that we can build in this world.
Yeah.
And we get to look at what our ancestors have left for us as the living proof.
Yes.
To that end.
No, we're the legacy of that. I mean, in the good sense, the fact that we've come this far, but what's happened is, what we've built is not sustainable. And
right.
And I think an ego is part of the journey. It's part of what pushes us out into the world. I think it's part of why we came here, was to have that experience of growth. But the other part of the journey is also realizing the illusion of the ego and letting go of the ego. And if you think of civilization, modern civilization, where it is, I kind of see it like like somebody who's sort of gone out, tried everything in the world they thought would make them happy, and they've tried to build this incredible, amazing life, and is like, it's not working. We're not happy. Finding the life that they built is not sustainable. and they're now starting to do some soul searching and saying, I'm lost. What's next? You know, and I think you guys are at a place where I think you're forerunners of something that's emerging. And I think you guys are very prophetic in that way. You're showcasing in a visual way what can be, which is what the world will need, because we will go through times where the ego-based systems of our planet are going to be shaken. We're already seeing it. But what we're seeing is a sort of tremors. We're going to see a lot more of it. And when that happens, when the certainty that we placed our lives in our political system, our economic system, in the Western ideals and all those things start to really shake, people are going to start looking for answers. And I think it'll go one of two ways. Either people will, they'll try and revert to what they knew in times past, the sort of nostalgia of the past, or they will look for what's real. It's going to be one of two ways. And so I think we'll see some very interesting times ahead. But I think for those that are already on that spiritual journey, it'll be one of the most exciting times to be on this planet. Because it'll be like the birth pangs of something new coming forward that we're going to be so excited to witness and to participate in. And a big part of that is going to be reclaiming our true masculine and feminine identities and understanding what that means.
In your experience growing up in the Mennonite community, and as you've evolved through corporations and brands, and now your interest and fascination with Polynesian culture, what do you think is the current role of masculinity? What in your estimation, what are maybe a better way to ask this would be, what are the values that men need to uphold in 2024?
Maybe before we get to values, I'd like to talk about the dynamics of masculinity and femininity, at least as I come to appreciate it.
Yeah, maybe understanding the dynamics will lead to what the values are.
Yeah, more, a way of a framework of thinking about it, then helps you to sort of distill those down into values. So, first of all, I think I want to separate out the concept of male and female from masculine and feminine. There's a masculine energy or a masculine way of being, and there's a feminine energy or way of being. And all of us have both within us. We all have some degree of masculine and feminine. It's just that we're dominant one way or the other. There are some who are, very balanced. There are some who are, quite strong one way or the other. And then there's some who, there are many women who are very comfortable in masculine energy. And there are many men who are very comfortable in feminine energy. There's nothing wrong with that, right? And that's what's interesting is with Polynesian culture, they've had no problem with that. Very tribal culture. You have, very masculine men who are also very emotional. You also have, they've had, since the start, trans has not been a problem at all in Polynesian culture. It's been accepted, right alongside, right alongside heterosexual and so forth.
Yeah. I find it's the puritanical culture that came along that branded those things right or wrong.
Oh, it goes way back before Puritanism. Way. I mean, this is patriarchy, right? Well, to some degree, actually, that's not entirely true. I think you're right in that Puritanism or maybe Protestantism, before Puritanism. I can tell you exactly when the shift happened. It was like around the time of, there was a church father called Augustine, who before he became a Christian was, a playboy and hedonist. So he became a Christian and he basically hated that previous part of his life and hated anything to do with sex. And so he started preaching that sex was a necessary evil that should only be used for procreation. So for like hundreds of years that was taught in the church. that very limited perspective, like, and that it was something shameful. And then with that, everything that was then divergent to heterosexual, not just lovemaking, heterosexual procreation was deemed a sin. So, they talk about the sex police. Like there was this, just as a funny anecdote, there was one position that was the approved position for having children called the missionary position of all things. And you were only allowed to sleep with your wife on certain days of the week. You couldn't do it too often. You only had to do it in the approved position. So the Catholic Church literally instituted sex police that would go around and spy on people to see if they were breaking the rules. And that was the status quo in our Western world and the view of sexuality for a long time. And the ancient view, even in Abrahamic religions, the ancient view on sexuality was vastly different. It was not shame-based. And I'm of the opinion, from my own studies, that actually the trans and gay men, well, and I mean any form of LGBT would have been fully accepted in the Hebraic times. We've just misinterpreted, and in many cases blatantly misinterpreted, a lot of these passages into things that they weren't trying to say. And that's probably a much deeper topic than I have time to go into here.
Sure, yeah. But let's go back to the masculine, feminine energies, because I think that's the track to follow.
So we come back to Polynesia and how they're much more fluid in terms of how they view masculinity and femininity, because in the West, we tended to cast those as roles, right? The masculine role, the breadwinner, the husband, the feminine role, the wife, the mother. They were roles within society that you had to fulfill. And those roles were very constricting because it was captured. It was packaged up as a sort of responsibility you had to carry in society, regardless of how you felt on the inside. And the masculine and feminine energy are divine principles that exist all throughout our planet, and we see it everywhere. And when you understand those principles, you can take the heart of it without necessarily having to fashion that into a strict regimented role to say, well, this is exactly what it looks like. Does that make sense? It's like, it's like taking the value but being flexible in the practice. So the masculine principle is will and intention. There's a verse in the Bible that says it's the will of the Father. So the masculine is about intentionality. So that tends to look like vision, purpose, determination. But that's only one part of the story, because the other side of that story that you need is the feminine, which is motion, energy, motion, some people say. But that's the receptive part of the will that nurtures will into life.
Is the emotion.
It's the emotion, the energy, the life-giving, right? It responds. The feminine principle responds to the masculine principle. You see this in the creation story in the Bible. You see this in just the dynamic of how things function between people on Earth.
How is it in the creation story?
So when you have, in the creation story, right, you have the Father speaking as the voice, right? The Father says, let there be light, right? So it describes the setting to begin with. The Father is the unseen, is the voice. The voice speaks about will and intention. What you have then is it talks about this planet, and it talks about the Spirit hovering over the waters of the planet. That's the feminine. So when the Father speaks, let there be light, speaks intention, the Spirit responds. It's like the sound waves of the light activate the Spirit to produce and create. And it's actually the feminine force that does the creative work, right?
it's the response. I've never considered it that way. Let there be light, and the response, let there be light as the masculine, and the response of the creation as the feminine, or the energy in motion. The energy in motion.
Energy in motion. So we tend to think in Western cultures, men being very powerful and women being very sort of weak and vulnerable, but actually it's not the case. You know, women move in a very powerful spiritual energy. And they often flow in that energy more easily than men do. But when you take them, put them in a world that's divorced of spiritual energy, now they're vulnerable because they're cut off from their true power. And we do that because we're afraid of it. That's what, you know, a lot of religious cultures have done. We're afraid of that feminine energy, so we're going to subdue it. We're going to hide it. We're going to control it. We're going to overpower it. So we're afraid of spirit, divine.
What is the harmonious way to work with the feminine energy in regards to community?
So, I mean, it changes the whole fundamental basis of how we relate to begin with. So let's talk about male and female relationships first, right? Because that's the starting point. So, ego-based love in the West is based on a power dynamic, you know, between the man and the woman, and it comes from this idea of you're looking for this person who's going to complete you. So you're approaching the relationship already from a place of being incomplete, scarcity, incomplete. I'm incomplete, and I need somebody to make me complete. So I'm looking for that person who's going to fulfill me. And so that creates the power dynamic, because the ego need of the man is for this control. The ego need of the woman is because she's cut off from her spiritual feminine divine. She feels vulnerable, so she wants protection, right? And so most ego-based relationships are not actually true unconditional love. We speak about, oh, this is true love, it's unconditional love. It's not. Most of them are based on they're transactional. They're based on a trade-off. Okay, I will give you protection if you submit to me and, you know, become my wife. And the other person says, okay, I will give you love and affection if you give me protection, right? And so then you go into this relationship because you're looking for that person who completes you. You go into this relationship not seeing who that person is, you're seeing the projection of that person you placed on that person, of who you need that person to be.
Not only in romantic relationships. I think those projections happen in all of our relations in many ways.
Yes, correct. We do that with everyone, especially if our relationships are transactional. We do that with people. And then we put this projection that's based on our expectations about, this is who I need you to be. So the moment you aren't that person, the moment that the projection slips and you're not that person, then I feel let down. I feel disappointed, I feel angry. I had this expectation of you. You were going to be this person for me, or you were going to do this for me, or whatever, right? And so that forces the ego-based relationship. So I'd say to people, when you're looking for a partner, look for the person that complements you, not the person that completes you. Don't bring your unwholeness to the relationship. Find your wholeness first within as a spiritual being, and then find the person that complements you in some way that you can share your journey with. But don't go in placing expectations on this person that they're going to be all of these things for you, because that's where all the fighting and the arguments stem from, is missed expectations. So when you start with that as the root of relationships, all our relationships, as you've said, are just projecting onto people what we need them to be. Now imagine trying to build a community out of that. Right?
Yeah. Yes.
Constant disappointments and warfare, right? Rather than true acceptance.
Even in brotherhood, I just gotta say, Josh, like, you're touching on some really powerful things here, because even in brotherhood, men project onto sacred sons, men project onto, people who are ahead of them, or people who are leading them on weekends even. In the men's work, there's all kinds of dad projections, or you're the guy who hurt me type of projections. And we get to meet those in a really healthy way. I think some of the work we're doing is undoing those projections between men so that we can truly see each other as brothers once again. The ironic thing about it doesn't take long. Usually in a weekend, we're hitting that cruising altitude about 6 hours into the experience. We've dropped a few of those projections. We're really getting honest with each other. And we call brotherhood the medicine, because it really is an enlivening type of experience. It gives life to remove those projections and to say, like, hey brother, I see you. And beyond that, like, I relate to you. I feel you for who you really are, not because I don't need any. And in brotherhood, in these ways that we work, we don't typically need anything from one another necessarily.
And imagine where community where men don't have to put up a facade of masculinity, and women don't have to put up a facade of femininity. I'm a woman. I don't have to pretend to be all vulnerable and needy, to attract a man. I can be powerful and confident in who I am, but still fully feminine. Right?
Or I'm a man, right? Yes. I don't have to have it all together and all figured out. I can allow the community or my brothers to support me in places where I need support. How about that?
I can be vulnerable, right? And I'm much stronger because I'm surrounded by other men and other people. I don't have to put up this air of strength and togetherness all the time. I'm in a safe place to be vulnerable. And what that does to relationships when we're not trying to fit people into these legacy roles of male and masculine and feminine, but people are moving freely in the masculine and feminine energy, is, I don't think any of us have seen that. I think I've caught glimpses of it here through the people and how they live, and there is no, here there is no division of like, well, I'm a man and men go off and do this, and I'm a woman and women go off and do this, except for, just having babies. But, it's like you have some of the best leaders here are women, right? Way better than the men. The men are more, out thinking about fishing and, doing some hunting, gathering, and the business women are here running the place, and it's just like, but there isn't this constrained picture of, well, this is what a woman needs to look like. This is what a man needs to look like, not in the same way that we have in the West. And at the same time, so feminine, so masculine, it's beautiful, but it sometimes really messes with your head, because it's like, this guy who's this big muscular warrior could be like crying the next minute and emotional, right? Because I'm not saying to do that all the time, but I'm saying that like there's not this filter going through their head of being like, I'm a man, I can't do that.
Yeah. I think about that with a character like The Rock. He's like, he's America's champion. He's the people's champ. And it's not because he's big and mean and scary. It's because he smiles. And that's still a mask. That's a mask that Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson probably wears. And I'm sure that he's in touch with his emotions and he has his spaces to be vulnerable. But there is something about that big charismatic character that can meet you in love and with a smile. And that makes people feel safe. It's a powerful aspect of masculinity.
Yeah, it is. It is. And, I'm excited to see how this is going to emerge in community. But it has to come from a place of people already connecting with the divine within and knowing who they are before this can be fully appreciated and realized. And it's going to be a journey.
It is. It's going to be a journey. And the cool thing is we get to practice. A lot of the healing modalities, the work that is out there, it is to practice because we are all in this game together. I feel that is one of the ultimate truths. We are all in this together. What are the steps to de-roll so that we can come into more authentic harmony?
Yeah. Well, I think the first step, and it's a journey. I'll put it that way because it's as you say, de-roll. It's not going to happen overnight. Um, but the first step is that you have to develop a spiritual practice, and you have to come to that place inside where you experience that true unconditional divine love, and you connect with who you are as an eternal being. Because that's the point where you start to elevate your consciousness. That's recognizing the divine spark within. When you do that, you can start, your life really becomes a journey of stripping away the inauthenticity to find the authentic beneath. And it's an ongoing journey. So it's, this is part of our growth. It's part of why we're here. But I speak about the spiritual path as being a path of disillusionment. Right? So the world that we have is an illusion, not in the sense that it's fake, but that it's a construct. Like if you're playing a video game, is the video game real? You're having a real experience with a video game, right? Emotional experience can be very intense. So there is a reality to it, but it's a construct. It's not an ultimate reality. And so the spiritual path is about letting go of the constructs that we have of reality. And when you do that, you find it's not that you're trying to achieve awakening or to find enlightenment. It's already within you. You are just becoming to awaken to what is already within. And so for most of us, that path, I struggle to find any major spiritual leader that has not at some point in their life gone through some stage of disillusionment. And disillusionment is the wake-up call, right? It's like you're sitting there going, something is not right about this, and I have to find what's real. Now, we all go through disillusionment, but some people, when they hit that, they just dig deeper into the illusion. Right? And it's just kind of like, hear no evil, see no evil, head in the sand. I don't want to acknowledge the illusion because I'm afraid of what's beyond that. I can't conceive of life without this belief or this self-belief that I have. For me, I became disillusioned with my religion at a young age. And I said, okay, rather than walk away from it, I'm going to give spirituality, I'm going to give God, the divine, the ever-living, a chance to reveal itself to me and show me that there is something real. And so I just would I was in high school, I spent days meditating in my room at night and praying and just asking for some sort of real experience, something that I knew beyond a shadow of a doubt was real. And after 2-3 weeks of this, I had this moment that was just ecstasy. My body started vibrating with this energy. I started feeling this incredible, intense love and joy wash over me. And I just knew I was loved and the universe was love. Everything was perfect love. It just, your whole mind just shifts. You wake up, when you have that experience. But the point was that started with disillusionment. And ever since then, every single time where I've come disillusioned about something, if I've embraced that, it has been the catalyst to a new stage of growth and evolution. Every single time. When I run away from it, I usually end up in a dark night of the soul. And it hasn't happened often, but I have gone through that period where I fought with it. And then you just feel lost until you're ready to face whatever that disillusionment is. And so it's interesting, as you grow in your spiritual journey, you actually start to appreciate and look forward to disillusionment, because you're like, okay, where else is there somewhere in my life where I'm holding on to an illusion? Because I know the reality beyond the illusion is going to be so much better. It's going to be so much more exciting and interesting. And I want to get there, right? What is it that I need to let go of to get there? And, coming to the ultimate place for me, which was which is where I had the most profound experience, was I had been introduced to a man who sort of became a guru mentor for me. He never called himself that, but he was just one of the most enlightened souls I had ever met. He's an artist living on an island in Vancouver Island in Canada, but just so incredibly profoundly rich in wisdom and but a nobody. He didn't want to ever. He wasn't trying to build a platform or a following or anything. He was just walking his path, you know. And we used to chat for hours on the phone. I lived in Scotland at the time. We'd talk for hours, and he was really challenging a lot of my beliefs. And I remember confessing to him one point that, you know, I was kind of scared and moving beyond some of these beliefs that I had held for so many years. And he said, Josh, what are you afraid of? He says, don't you think your father's big enough to get you where you need to go? And it was the most calming, reassuring, like, the phrase I've ever heard in my life. And I just felt something within me release. And now, bear in mind, I had spent years immersed in theology, trying to understand God and through this framework of theology. And so after that conversation, I went and took a walk through the forest. We happened to live in an ancient forest in Scotland, trees hundreds of years old. And I was walking through this forest, and I had this moment where I heard this voice from heaven, and the voice of my father just saying, he said, Josh, do you want the idea of me or the reality of me? And I knew what I was being asked to do. And in my mind's eye, I saw I was like standing in front of this altar, and I was holding in my arms all of these scrolls. And these scrolls I knew were the most precious thing in the world to me. There were all of these theological ideas that I'd spent years studying to try and understand who was God and all this, you know, and with fervor, not just with dogma, but like I really wanted to understand who was God. And these were all my most precious ideas in the world. And I knew I was being asked if I wanted the idea, if I wanted these ideas about God, or if I wanted the reality of God. And I said, I'm ready. And I just put all of them in my mind's eye on the fire, and I watched them burn. I want the reality of the ever living. And I don't care, you know, because the other part of the question, sorry, I didn't ask, is he said, would you believe me even if you found out that everything you knew about me was wrong? And so that went with it. So did I want the idea or the reality? And for me, it was I wanted the reality. And I don't care what, you know, how much error, untruth, whatever I uncovered in myself, how it affected my beliefs about myself, the world. You know, mostly when we're talking about beliefs, what scares us most is not the beliefs themselves, but the implication of the beliefs. What does that mean for why I'm here? For what have I been living my whole life wrong? Am I doing the wrong things? Am I, you know, unloved? Am I, you know, it's the fear of the implications, not the reality. And I wanted what's true. And that's been the hunger of my heart. I want to know what's true. And I don't care what the cost is. Give me what's true, because what's true is real.
I'm going to take a breath into all that. God is big enough to get us where we're going.
Absolutely.
That's a powerful moment. It's a trust fall into God's hands. You know, and I feel the power of that statement in that moment, and the ability for one to come back to that, because it's a both and. There is a divine spark within, as you stated, but then there's the all of creation, you know, and that's the relationship that we as humans are really at the intersection of.
Yeah.
We are the experience of the divine spark within in the creation of all.
So I'm glad you brought that up, actually, because that was another part I left off of that story. Because when that happened, I mentioned I was walking through this forest, and I felt my identity and who I was began to slip away into the background. And I had this moment that the only thing I've seen that was close to this was like Avatar. You know, when they go out, you know, he gets in his avatar and he goes out and sees this world that's like, you know, electric and alive. It's exactly how I felt. I felt that I ceased to exist as a separate being. And I felt like I was in complete oneness with everything. I felt like every leaf on every tree, every blade of every, you know, and every petal was just surging with this energy of life and just flowing through me. And it was all one. There was no separation between that tree and that plant, or that plant and that rock, or that rock and myself. And so it's that divine spark within you that's recognizing the divine in everything else. But we have to get beyond the constructs of our mind. That's the journey. The journey is disillusionment. That's the crumbling of the constructs to find the reality on the other side.
And you had this experience without plant medicine?
No plant. Okay.
Because what you're explaining, like to be able to see the blossoming of the tree again, to notice a flower in partial bloom, you know, that happens when the plants, once again, they don't add anything to us. They actually just remove the illusion of the ego and of the self so that we can be in reciprocity, but so that we can be in wholeness once again.
Yeah.
Because because it is all connected.
Yeah. Yeah. It's beautiful, isn't it?
It's
beautiful.
Best.
And the thing is that when you find that, you don't need to be anything other than authentically you. All it is just about learning to identify what's pulling you out of your authenticity and letting that go.
There it is.
And maybe as a man, it's being afraid to let go sometimes, being afraid to be vulnerable, you know, trying to keep it up, you know, keep up the mask, afraid you'll be rejected, whatever that fear is. It's letting go, and just coming to a place of just complete trust and peace within yourself, you know, because your Father's big enough to get you where you need to go.
It's true, and it still requires courage. This is the thing.
It does. It does.
Of all of the folks I know who are having significant impact, or what I deem to be, you know, positive impact, they're all courageous. They're all courageously authentic.
Yeah.
And Josh, you're fueling me up, bro. You're giving me so much good energy with the way you're breaking it down. I wanna bring it full circle. I want to pull it back together into the harmony of community, because we went through the journey of self and the divine. So how do we bring our authentic self to the community in a good way, where we respect each other's roles, where where the rising tide raises all ships?
Right.
And I know we have the challenges and the really a rebirth process that's happening currently.
Yeah.
So how do we do it in community right now?
So, I mean, the goal with community then is to create a space where you're safe to do that. Everything in the community has to serve that. Safe to be authentic and absolutely real. Because that is the work. The more that we do that, the stronger we become as a spiritual community, not just as an earthly community, as a spiritual community. Create that safety, that openness, that vulnerability. And that opens up that energy flow of love, right? I view love as the life-giving force of the universe, right? It's an energy flow. It's one of the challenges in people saying all the time, love yourself. It's difficult because it's self-referential, right? Love is a flow of energy from one to another. It's a life-giving flow. So you can open up to allow yourself to be loved. But it's also, love is like air, right? you have to learn how to breathe it. You have to learn how to receive it. And so when somebody opens up with that vulnerability, it creates that opportunity for, it's like, connecting, positive and minus and negative on a battery, and just, creates that positive and negative charge that allows that energy to flow. And so the whole point is to create that space of authenticity. And then it's to grow in that space, because you're going to get people at all stages in that journey. Some who are just barely setting out, who are full of all kinds of insecurities and are, trying to work through all that stuff. And it gets to be a messy process, right? When they're going through that. So it has to be a safe space for them as well. So what I typically, from a practical standpoint, I would say, okay, put out some, first, I think it's important for you and the sort of leaders of this to externalize your ideas. If you haven't already, to put it out and say, okay, these are the values and principles that we believe in. We hold to them humbly and lightly, but these are our best explanations. That allows people to much more quickly understand how you think. And you need to be specific. It's not just we believe in humility. What does humility look like? We believe in this kind of humility, right? Or we believe in masculinity, what kind of masculinity do we believe in, and so forth, and femininity and things like that. Externalizing some of those ideas, but holding to them lightly, not becoming attached to them, right? We can become attached to anything, and that interrupts our spiritual growth. So we're not attached to the ideas, but we are sharing the ideas freely, and then building practices around that. Now, practices can be both positive habits that we develop, but there also can just be some ground rules that create and protect the safety of others. And that's more important. The idea is you're creating a safe space. So you're saying, okay, we want to, at the very least, make sure these things don't happen, to protect people from getting abused, taken advantage of, and so forth. And I would have these things as a group of elders where you regularly review them and adapt them. These are not cast in stone. They're reviewed and adapted. And a lot of flexibility, that as you have groups within your group that want to form a community here, and I hope this happens all over the world, that we see communities and real physical living communities formed in places where people can actually break bread together and share the day-to-day of life together, because the power that's going to have on the rest of the world to see that in action will be incredible. It will be seismic.
That's really important, because I love the Thich Nhat Hanh quote, which is the next form of the Buddha will not be an individual, but it will be in a community.
Yeah.
And so there will be these templates around the world, these templates for how to ascend as communities. And I believe we're currently in the vision and intention stage. Because probably, as you know, there's so many folks out there in the community. Oh, I want to be a part of the village, or I want to, people are seeking that right now. And the visions are being placed, and there's very few who are taking specific action towards that end in a good way. And I'm coming back to my earlier statement. I believe the men have to be aligned with their hearts in order for community to thrive as a foundational piece. Otherwise, I've witnessed what has happened with misalignments within community.
I think as well, you need to recognize those who have proven themselves, as the mature ones and the elders who are the exemplars of it, and also create space for those who are just trying to figure it out. A really interesting life lesson for me was when, I had my oldest daughter she was about 7 or 8. And, I had always taken this approach, love is the most important thing in the world. If my kids learn how to love people, that's all they care about, for them in life. If they learn how to love, that's it. And so I was trying when she was young to teach her, I want you to love your sister and love us and we love you, and just trying to explain that to her. And there was this one time where she was just picking on her sister and making her sister angry, your younger sister. And I got annoyed with her because she did this all the time. And I said to her, you know what? Damn it. When I was a kid, we had rules in the house. We're going to have rules in this house. And I was so annoyed. I was like, I'm going to go print up some rules and put them on the fridge, just like we had in my house, which is very traditional. And I was that way in many ways. But I was like, we're going to have rules on this house. So I went and printed off this very simple sort of childlike set of rules, which is, almost like 10 Commandments stuff, but like, don't steal from your sister, don't hit your sister, don't, so on and so forth. And I put those on the fridge, and I walked her over to those, and I was like, okay, so these are the rules of the house. If you break these rules, you're going to be in trouble. And I ran her through the rules. She looks at the rules for a minute. She goes, so you mean to tell me that if I don't break these rules, you're not going to be angry at me? And I was like, yes. And she had this big smile on her face. She lit up. I'm thinking, I feel so awful. I'm like the worst dad in the world, and my daughter's happy she has rules. But, as I thought about it afterwards, I thought, she has no idea what, at her level of comprehension, no idea what love looks like. And so I needed to give her rules that modeled love, but only until she was old enough to understand love herself, at which point the rules became surplus to requirements. I mean, obviously, if I went, she's on her own now, growing up, has a career, if I went to her house and told her, you will obey these rules, she'd tell me where to go. It's like she doesn't need that now, right? And so kids learn to model their parents and practice life through play. And they learn through rules.
Real quick, the thing that I'm actually taking from that story is the impact of what fathers bring, let's say with our anger, with our frustration, with our corrections. And so my piece here with fatherhood is what you displayed is actually you connected with your daughter. You didn't, this is just a story from your life, but it's like connection over the correction. And that's the angle, because I have it in my own experience and I know what it's like to feel that. And in the father role, it's like, wow, what our kids really want from us is connection, is love, and ultimately like for us not to be upset. And isn't that something? She's willing to take a look at your rules over here for the promise
Right.
of your fatherly love.
Yeah. You're absolutely right. And it's interesting observation you pulled out, because looking back on it now, I think it's absolutely correct, but I hadn't looked at it in that way. But now I have the hindsight. I've got a younger son and less insecurity than I did. I was very young when I had my oldest daughter, like 23. And so I was very young and still dealing with a lot of ego insecurity, back then. And now raising a son now, it's like, he has his moments, but it's not affecting me in the same way, because it's not triggering my insecurities, But the point I was making with that is that we learn through, when we're children, we learn through rules, right? Because rules are teaching us principles. Rules can't replace love. They can model what love looks like. Eventually, you have to love, and learn to love, and that comes from the heart. But you can model it in a healthy way. And most of those are modeling in terms of prohibitive. They're not saying you have to do this, you have to do that, you have to do this. Most of those are saying, okay, don't do this, don't do that, don't do this, right? I mean, stuff like fairly universally accepted. But so my point being, when you have people that are very early in their journey, you have to model what love looks like. And it can be a little bit more formulaic in terms of how you shape a community, because you want to set some boundaries that protect people from those who might come in and want to get abusive or, kind of not really gel and connect with the community and so forth. So you set some ground rules. And those provide just the safety barriers. But then you create practices together that model these things.
Yeah. Yeah, we make agreements in our community, right? Those are the ground rules. We call them agreements. It's even in the languaging, when it's agreements versus rules, it shifts something. It's like, oh, we're both in agreement. It's not one dictating to the other.
Right. There's a mutuality of agreement. Exactly right. Which I think is really interesting. Because when I looked at the early followers of Jesus, they didn't build churches. They saw themselves as they themselves were a living community, right? It wasn't at all like we had now. And you look at the model, they lived, number one, in complete community. It says they had everything in common. They made sure that every need within the community was met. And imagine what that does for safety when people are coming together saying, okay, we're going to make sure that there is every single need in this place is met. Whatever we've got to do to help give that other person security and what they need, we're going to come together as a group and do that. Okay, so that creates a huge amount of security. And then they had an elder model where they had the senior leaders who were leading the group, and they led together as a collective. Matter of fact, decision-making was collective as an entire group. It wasn't just the elders. It was the entire group that was making decisions together. But the elders were providing guidance in the decision-making. And I think that's really important. We're not trying to create a hierarchy, because that stands against the oneness. But if you look at tribal communities, it's very much the same. The elders aren't running the community. They're guiding. They're providing wisdom. It's the young people who have all the energy that are running the community. But they're doing it collectively because they're all one. They're all one family. And that's the objective really with the spiritual community. In some ways, it's incredibly simple. But you will have, maybe younger people within the group where you want to kind of set some boundaries to begin with until they've sort of gone through the rite of passage, if you will. That may be something you decide to do. And it's just, okay, we just need to really sort of set some basics here, make sure that you're, aligned and fully accepted into the community. Because once you're in, you're family. Because it's not just come and go, you're family for life.
Yes.
Covenant. That's what covenant's about.
Covenant. Family for life. One tribe, one heart, one love. Josh, I think there's going to be a part 2 to this conversation, and maybe a 3.
Love that.
We'll bust out a trilogy, and I'm going to stay on with you after because I just to bring it back, I hear the wisdom from which you speak, and I can understand now why some of these heads of Fortune 500 companies and some of these men look to you for your leadership and for your advice. And so I'm not leading a Fortune 500 company, but I do have a massive community looking to do some good in this world, and I would like to heed some of your advice.
And anytime. And brother, I just wanted to say from the first conversation we had, it was just an incredible energy, and I love what you guys are doing. I think you got an incredible community around you. You guys are doing great stuff and speaking to a real need in society. And so it's just an absolute honor to serve you guys in any way that I can and support you guys through this journey.
Yeah. I think I follow energy as well. And so, you brought some energy towards us, and I'm like, okay, let's see what's here, because there is something alive, and now I'm very clear on what that is. So part 2 to come. For now, we'll kind of hold it there, and yeah, just to say that more to come. actually, Josh.
Wonderful. Looking forward to.
And, I would love to explore too, maybe as we drop back in, you're kind of given this foresight that, potentially harder times are to come. And so how do we get our community prepared for harder times? How do we continue to come together with these agreements, with our rituals, with our values out in front, put our heads down like that buffalo to face the mighty harsh north winds? Because I believe that's kind of the energy that's needed now.
Yeah, for sure. We'd love to get into that.
With that, for now, we're going to close it up. Wow, I'm very inspired, and I took 2 sheets of notes here. I'm all over with this. So the conversation continues with that. For now, Sacred Sons, Josh Jost, Adam Jackson, Route family, peace.